welcome to our noon edition of Arirang News. Here are the stories making the headlines at this hour. President Yoon has yet again stressed the need to raise the number of medical school admission slots by 2,000 next year. He did open the room for dialogue with doctors as long as they bring a unified proposal on the medical reform. North Korea has fired a medium-range ballistic missile into the East Sea this morning. Tuesday's launch comes around 2 weeks after the regime conducted firing drills with super-large rocket launchers designed to hit Seoul. Inflation is still a strain on the wallets of consumers in South Korea, particularly by rising fruit prices. The country's consumer price index, an important barometer of inflation, rose 3.1% on year in March. President Yoon rolled up his sleeves to address the public and the absent trainee doctors on why a medical school admissions hike is necessary. But he also said talks will be available if doctors bring a unified and rational solution to the table. Our top office correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
The Yoon administration has hinted there may be room to negotiate with doctors on strike if they can present a solid case for lowering the number of extra students the government wants to add to medical schools each year. This came on Monday as the president made a live televised address to the Korean public to stress the urgent need for medical reform, namely by expanding the quota of students admitted to medical schools by 2,000 annually. The policy has been opposed by some 12,000 junior doctors who've staged the walkout since late February, compromising medical services nationwide, particularly in already underserved areas like emergency and critical care, as well as regions outside Seoul. Doctors have argued that more medical students would lower the quality of education and that improving doctors' compensation would incentivize working in more strenuous healthcare fields. Yoon said there have been sufficient consultations with medical practitioners and experts to decide 2,000 as the minimum number of additional students needed to strengthen the medical delivery system in order to meet the growing demand for healthcare in the rapidly aging country.
지금 당장 5,000명의 의사가 더 필요합니다. 결국 2035년까지 최소한 15,000명의 의사를 확충해야 합니다. 증원에 반대하는 이유가 장래 수입 감소를 걱정하는 것이라면 결코 그렇지 않습니다. 현재 우리나라 의사들의 평균 소득은 OECD 국가들 가운데 1위입니다. 20년 후에 의사가 2만 명이 더 늘어서 수입이 줄어들 것이라는 걱정은 기우에 불과합니다.
Even with 2,000 more enrolled in medical schools, Yoon said it would take about a decade for them to expand the pool of qualified doctors, and at least 20 years for the number of doctors to increase by 20,000. Expressing his regret that the collective action by doctors threatens the lives and well-being of citizens, he noted that some 8,800 now face cancellation of their license to practice medicine.
제가 대통령으로서 앞으로 수많은 국민의 생명을 구하고 또 수많은 국민의 건강을 지켜낼 여러분을 제재하거나 처벌하고 싶겠습니까? 여러분은 대한민국의 매우 중요한 미래 자산입니다. 국민이 여러분에게 거는 기대와 여러분의 공적 책무를 잊지 말아 주시기 바랍니다. 환자가 기다리고 있는 의료 현장으로 조속히 복귀해 주십시오.
Still, Yoon appeared to offer some room for negotiation, saying he is open to discussing appropriate and reasonable alternatives to adding 2,000 extra students, in the form of a unified evidence-based case by doctors, instead of arbitrary and discordant criticism of the government. His policy chief of staff added later in a broadcast interview that it's not about keeping the quota increase at 2,000, but presenting a rational solution that could help steer policy in a better direction.
The President this month will launch a special committee under his supervision to promote dialogue between policymakers and the medical community in order to coordinate and initiate a comprehensive reform. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Senior doctors have criticized President Yoon's national address, saying that the speech did not offer any solutions to resolve the medical service disruption. Finding the right care will become more challenging as outpatient services and surgeries are being reduced amid the continued absence of junior doctors from hospitals. Shin Ha-young with more.
Senior doctors have expressed disappointment with President Yoon's medical reform speech, saying they could not find any differences from previous announcements by the government. During a briefing on Monday, the Korean Medical Association stated that doctors were hoping that President Yoon was going to come up with some solutions. Countering the president's statement that there had been discussions with the medical community regarding the medical school enrollment quota expansion, the KMA emphasized that doctors' opinions have not been considered at all. As of Monday, medical school professors at general hospitals have begun reducing outpatient services and surgeries. Because of the en masse walkout by trainee doctors 7 weeks ago, the medical professors keeping hospitals running are suffering from fatigue. Professors from 20 schools at 40 nationwide stated last Saturday that 1 day off will be mandatory after working continuously for 24 hours. They added that outpatient services and surgeries for severe and emergency patients will be scheduled based on this. The KMA, the biggest doctors group in the country, also announced doctors who run private clinics will shorten their working hours to 40 hours per week. On Monday, the health ministry urged the medical community to withdraw their collective actions and reiterated its measures to keep the health system functioning.
Government will closely examine the operating of emergency rooms and strengthen the emergency medical system. The government will provide available personnel to the fullest and continuously monitor the professors' reduced working hours and resignations.
While there haven't been significant changes on the first day since outpatient services and surgeries were reduced, eyes are now on whether they'll be reduced even further. 신하영, Arirang News.
North Korea appears to have launched an intermediate-range ballistic missile into the East Sea this morning. Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff detected the ballistic missile at around 6:53 a.m., launched toward the East Sea from the Pyongyang area. Tuesday's launch comes around 2 weeks after the regime conducted firing drills involving super-large multiple rocket launchers designed to target South Korea's capital, Seoul, under the supervision of leader Kim Jong-un. Seoul's Joint Chiefs of Staff is analyzing the details of today's launch and said it's closely cooperating with the U.S. and Japan to maintain a full readiness stance. President Yoon Suk-yeol says North Korea's attempts to divide the nation and interfere with the upcoming election only make South Korea unite more tightly, referring to the North's latest missile provocation. The remarks came as he opened a cabinet meeting on Tuesday morning at Sejong Government Complex. With early voting for the general election starting on Friday, he also said he would ensure a fair and transparent election while urging people to cast their ballots. In the meantime, he also emphasized finishing making Sejong the nation's administrative capital by creating a second presidential office and moving the parliament to the city. The Ministry of Unification has warned North Korea about its continued attempts to meddle with South Korea's upcoming general election. The ministry released a statement on Tuesday saying that Pyongyang is continuously trying to create tension and diversion in South Korean society by slandering President Yoon using its state media. The Unification Ministry said these attempts to undermine the very foundations of South Korea's liberal democratic system will not be condoned. North Korea has been criticizing South Korea in its official newspaper, the Rodong-sinmun, and the number of such articles has increased ahead of the general election. The 4-day voting period for the 22nd general election for those aboard ships began today. 2,050 people are eligible to vote from ships out at sea. The ballots will reach the National Election Commission by fax. Meanwhile, the regular voting period for people overseas has ended in most regions around the world. According to the NEC on Tuesday morning, at least 83,000 overseas voters have cast their ballots. This surpasses the final voter turnout from the last general election in 2020, where a little over 40,000 people voted outside of South Korea. Many elections around the world are scheduled for this year, affecting almost half of the global population. It is imminent here in South Korea, with less than 10 days left until the general election. Our National Assembly correspondent Lee Si-hoo sat down with experts to see what this election means for other countries around the world.
2024 has been dubbed the ultimate election year, with national elections scheduled or expected in at least 64 countries. Taiwan was one of the first to lead the way, electing its new president in January, and later this year in November, the U.S. will elect its new president. As for South Korea's 22nd general election, political science and foreign diplomacy experts say it's garnering much global attention.
I think it's an object of interest not only in Asian countries but also around the world, because it will have a great influence on not just the Asian order but also the world order, depending on what kind of conservative and progressive governments are established.
The election carries special implications for other democracies.
I think that South Korea's elections can have many implications for liberal democracies in terms of the democratic responsibility of the administration or parliament, as the retreat of democracy emerges as an important topic in the global community today.
The election results will determine the makeup of the assembly, which is currently controlled by the opposition.
From the general perspective, definitely the election has a meaning of the midterm election for the incumbent Yoon government. So definitely the results have a significant impact on the remaining political tenures for President Yoon.
The question is, how will it change foreign relations?
Because from the trilateral cooperation perspective, United States and the Japanese sides want to be for a pro-US ally party, but as you know, the divided foreign policy approach from the incumbent party and the opposition party. So,
if the Conservative ruling party wins this election, I think the existing Korea-US relationship will be very resilient. Then I think the relationship between the Yoon Suk-yeol government and the Biden government in the United States will be more closely established. On the contrary, if the Democratic Party wins the majority, it's expected that the Asia-Pacific diplomatic relations centered around Korea, the US and Japan, sought by the Yoon Suk-yeol administration, will take some time.
Experts say inter-Korean relationships could also take a different shape as the ruling and opposition parties pursue divided approaches. Hawk-like policies are expected from the ruling party, while more reconciliation with Pyongyang is expected from the opposition. As South Korea faces many geopolitical, inter-Korean and industrial challenges, political experts say that the country is at a crucial crossroads of choices that will determine its national future. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
Fruit prices in South Korea are riding a high, and with that, so are consumer prices. The government has come up with a series of measures, including short-term solutions such as increasing imports and long-term solutions such as smart farming, to deal with pressing concerns. Our Moon Hye-ryun has the details.
Inflation in South Korea has continued to hover in the 3% range for 2 consecutive months on the back of high prices of fresh fruit. Data from Statistics Korea released on Tuesday shows that the country's consumer price index, a key gauge of inflation, rose 3.1% in March compared to the same month the year before. Core inflation, excluding volatile food and energy prices, came to 2.4%, while the index measuring 144 daily necessities rose 3.8%. This was driven by continued price hikes of fresh produce with poor weather conditions, the rise in prices for fresh fruit in particular increasing by just under 41% on year. Apples and pears saw around an 88% jump in prices, which is their biggest on-year jump since data was first compiled in 1980. Speaking at a meeting to discuss consumer prices, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok addressed these concerns.
Government is heavily aware of the concerns that people have when doing their grocery shopping and will do its utmost to stabilize inflation to the 2% range.
Several measures to lower fruit prices have been announced. Starting this month, fruit discounts will be raised from 20% to 30%, as well as increasing fruit imports. The Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs aims to supply 50,000 tons of 11 different types of imported fruit, such as bananas and oranges, by the end of June at a 20% discount. And to address the particularly high prices of apples, the government will be expanding contract farming for apples from 49,000 tons last year to 60,000 tons this year, meaning that more apples will be cultivated under government contracts. The Agriculture Ministry has also pledged to set up long-term goals to effectively respond to the root of the problem going forward, climate change and consider smart farming alternatives to increase yields. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
South Korea announces its plans to raise its production and exports of biopharmaceuticals, aiming to nurture the sector into the country's new growth engine, comparable to that of semiconductors. Here's our Eun-jin with the details.
The government unveiled its vision to increase exports of biopharmaceuticals to $10 billion by 2030. In a meeting on Monday with industry insiders from domestic firms such as Samsung Biologics and Celltrion, the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy announced comprehensive measures to fund and support growth in the sector. The ministry will allocate 2.1 trillion Korean won, over $1.5 billion for these starting this year and lasting until 2030. The ministry also expects to attract over $13 billion in private investment to boost production to more than $11 billion and exports to $10 billion. These funds will be used to support research and development, create an ecosystem for biological materials, fund parts and equipment used during manufacturing, and to establish an industrial base. In addition to financial support, a Korean version of the U.S. Biomade project will be set up following a preliminary study. Biomade was established in the United States in 2020 as a nonprofit institute that collaborates with public and private entities to advance sustainable and reliable bioindustrial manufacturing technologies. Other than bookmarking foreign agencies, South Korea will also strengthen cooperation with leading international organizations to accelerate the production and commercialization of biopharmaceutical products. As well as increasing exports, the ministry will set up a solid domestic supply chain by 2030, aiming to localize the production of biopharmaceuticals and raise the domestic production rate to 15%. The ministry revealed a three-step roadmap spanning until 2033 to secure 80 different core materials and the equipment needed to make the vision a reality. This announcement from the Industry Ministry follows President Yoon Suk-yeol's pledge last week to invest heavily in R&D of advanced biotechnology and set up a cluster of bio companies. Eun-jin, Arirang News.
The 2024 edition report by the U.S. Trade Representative has criticized South Korean bills that mandates foreign content providers to pay network usage fees. Park Gon-woo with the details.
The U.S. Trade Representative on its 2024 National Trade Estimate Report on Foreign Trade Barriers released on Friday has continued raising issues on pending South Korean bills, calling on foreign online content providers to pay network usage fees. Calling the bills anti-competitive, the report said the National Assembly has been proposing the legislative measures since 2021. The report also said the network usage fees U.S. content providers would have to pay will be profiting the Korean competitors, especially some Korean internet service providers, including SK Broadband, KT, and LG U+, which are also content providers. The bills would also strengthen their grip on the market. Some U.S. companies opposed the measures, even going for litigation. Twitch, Amazon's streaming platform, suspended its service in Korea at the end of February. In the report, USTR also raised issue with Korea's restrictions on agricultural biotechnology, delaying the approval of new tech products. But the length of this year's report dealing with Korea was 2 pages shorter than of last year's and 18% shorter overall. In the foreword, there was a sentence that didn't appear last year, that each trading partner has a sovereign right to adopt measures in furtherance of legitimate public purposes. U.S. Chamber of Commerce Senior Vice President and Head of International John Murphy said in a statement that there's the risk of giving the green light to other foreign governments to raise barriers against U.S. exports or otherwise discriminate against U.S. companies. Park Gon-woo, Arirang News.
Iran says Israel bombed its embassy in Syria, killing a top commander. While Israel has not yet claimed responsibility for the bombing, Tehran says it preserves the right to respond to the consulate attack. Lee Seung-jae has more.
In what may further escalate the already tense situation in the Middle East, Iran says Israel is responsible for bombing its embassy in Syria. According to local media, the Iranian embassy in Damascus was bombed with Israeli warplanes, suspected of being responsible. Tehran claimed that the attack killed 7 military advisors, including 3 senior commanders. However, Israel has not claimed a responsibility for the attack, with an Israeli military spokesman only saying that it does not comment on reports in the foreign media. The Syrian foreign minister and an interior minister were at the scene in the aftermath of the attack, both condemning what they called a terrorist attack that killed innocent people. In response to the consulate bombing, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Nasir Kanani said Tehran preserves the right to respond to the Damascus consulate attack. He added that Iran will decide later how to respond and punish the aggressor. Iran's top diplomat Hossein Amir Abdollahian earlier pointed to Israel as being the mastermind behind the attack and said the attack violated all international agreements. Since October 7th last year, when armed conflict between Israel and Hamas began, Israel has targeted military installations belonging to Iran and those of its proxies in Syria. Monday's attack would mark the first Israel attack on an embassy compound since the conflict began. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
On the cultural front, a few months ago, we brought you a story introducing Maestro Jaap van Zweden, the new music director of the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra. Turns out he will be joined by his longtime friend Guus Hiddink in elevating the orchestra to, in his words, the absolute top. Our culture correspondent Song Yujin reports.
2002 is a year Korea will never forget. The Korean men's national football team reached the World Cup semifinals for the first time, its best performance to date. At the heart of this miracle was Guus Hiddink, the then manager of the team. 22 years later, Mr. Hiddink has returned to Korea, this time for the arts. The Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra, one of the country's oldest orchestras, has appointed him as its honorary ambassador. Its new music director, Jaap van Zweden, played a big role in the former coach accepting the offer. Their friendship dates back decades when Mr. Hiddink watched a documentary featuring the maestro.
And I saw the similarities, what we try to do to get the best out of an individual player and to melt it to a team performance. And that's why I approached him.
Beyond their Dutch heritage, it's their shared values that bind them together.
We like also to help people. And I have my foundation. Hiddink has his foundation. And where we see big friendship in similarities is that we see that people who need help in life, we like to help them. And we see how important it is.
Despite stepping down as coach of the Korean national team after the 2002 World Cup, Korea holds a special place in Mr. Hiddink's heart. He became the first honorary Korean in 2002 and has been leading the Guus Hiddink Foundation since 2007, building futsal fields nationwide to make football more accessible for the disadvantaged and disabled. As an ambassador for the SPO, he's dedicated to that same goal.
When I was a soccer player, a football player, in the early days, very early days, they sent us to clubs, to university, to high schools, outside our training, outside our matches, which means that we bring our football to schools and to universities and to clubs. We have to bring also music, classical music or whatsoever, into the school system as well.
Football and orchestra music may seem worlds apart, but they share the ability to bring people together, from the players to the audience. And that's what Mr. Hiddink hopes to do. Promote harmony through music by introducing Seoul Philharmonic to the world. Song Yujin, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. If you liked yesterday's delightful spring day, you will enjoy today's as well. It is warmer today in the capital, topping out at 23 degrees Celsius this afternoon, but not as sunny as yesterday. And when the sun is not out, temperatures drop rapidly, so be mindful of temperature swings and dress accordingly. Then rain is in the forecast for southern Korea. Those on Jeju will receive rain first, spreading to the rest of the south as the afternoon goes on. It will rain heavily on Jeju and Jeollanam-do, while Jeollabuk-do and Gyeongsang-puk-do provinces could see 10 to 40 millimeters of rainfall. Central regions will receive rain tomorrow. In Seoul and Chuncheon will be topping out at 23 degrees. Busan and Jeju will see a high of 20 degrees Celsius this afternoon, feeling more like mid-May in many parts of the country. And the air quality will be normal to good nationwide all day today. Rain should let up tomorrow afternoon while temperatures stay warmer than normal through the weekend. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That's all we have for you at this hour. We'll bring you more updates at the same time tomorrow.